On a routine flight to Munich, an elderly veteran quietly boarded and took his assigned seat. But a strict flight attendant didn't recognize who he was, and publicly ordered him to move to the middle seat. He obeyed without protest. 9 minutes later, the cabin doors opened, and what the pilot did next left everyone speechless. What no one knew was that the old man had a past worth saluting, and this flight would change everything. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The flight crew barely masked their exhaustion as passengers boarded Flight 349 to Munich. The cabin humming with muffled voices, plastic bag rustling, and the occasional clang of a suitcase against the seat frames. But none of the 100-plus travelers knew that row 17 would become the eye of a storm. They would never forget. There, a frail old man, maybe in his late 80s, moves slowly down the aisle, one hand on his seat stub, the other gripping the backrests for balance. His jacket faded, his U.S. Army cap bent from decades of wear. And though no one offered to help, he smiled politely at each row he passed, looking for his seat, 17C, aisle, a spot he'd chosen for easy access due to his arthritic knees and the surgical metal in his hip. That sang with pain every time he stood too long, but before he could ease into the seat. The lead flight attendant, Petra Weiss, tall, rigid, with her red scarf tied in a perfect square knot and eyes that scanned like searchlights, intercepted him with the command, "Middle seat, sir," immediately, as if issuing orders in a drill, not addressing a paying passenger, and the old man blinked, confused, lifted his ticket with trembling fingers, and softly replied, "My seat's here," tapping the stub. But Petra snatched it, stared at it, and without apology snapped, "There's been a change," not offering explanation, only authority, leaving the man to quietly shuffle into 17B between two strangers on one side. A man furiously typing on his laptop. On the other, a woman juggling a baby and a bottle, and the mood shifted as nearby passengers began whispering, their curiosity piqued by the harshness of Petra's tone. And yet no one intervened, not even when the old man bumped his leg trying to sit, grimacing as he twisted into the tight space, his service patch brushing the elbow of the man beside him, who muttered under his breath, "Should have just stayed home," and Petra vanished to the front, but not before giving him a final once-over like a problem she'd contained, unaware or perhaps unconcerned that several passengers had begun filming with their phones. Sensing something wrong, for 9 long minutes, the cabin remained tense, the old man silent, his eyes fixed out the window at the refueling truck, his hand resting over the scar on his chest he'd earned during a night mission decades ago. In freezing European woods no one ever talks about anymore. And then, without warning, the forward cabin door hissed open and 2 men in dark suits stepped in. Not part of airport security, not wearing TSA tags, but federal, clean-cut, eyes sharp, and every steward froze as they walked straight to the captain, whispered something urgent, and pointed toward row 17. And Petra's posture stiffened when one of the men pointed at her and said, "You need to come with us," her confident facade cracking just enough for sweat to bead along her hairline. as she followed them down the aisle, stopping in front of the old man, who now looked up without fear, only quiet resignation. "Sir," one agent said, "is your name Colonel James D. Keller?" And the man nodded, slowly, while Petra, trying to recover control, blurted, "He refused to follow instructions. He disrupted boarding." But the agent cut her off. "Colonel Keller is under federal protection. He is carrying a diplomatic package vital to ongoing de-escalation operations in Eastern Europe. He is also a recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross and a Medal of Honor candidate undergoing final vetting," and gasps rippled through the cabin. Phones recording now in earnest as Petra's lips parted, her voice gone, her body trembling as the agent continued. "And you, without authorization, forcibly reassigned his seat, jeopardizing both his physical safety and a time-sensitive mission." And the captain emerged from the cockpit, removing his cap as he approached, eyes downcast, murmuring, "Colonel, sir, I apologize on behalf of the entire airline." But Keller just waved it off, whispering, "You weren't the one who barked orders." And the baby next to him stopped crying as if sensing the gravity in the air. And the mother instinctively touched Keller's arm and said, "I'm sorry, sir." And around them, everyone was now standing, some in shame, some in reverence, and Petra, who had spent years enforcing rules with robotic precision, now stood exposed under a different kind of spotlight, the judgment of decency, which doesn't forget, doesn't forgive so easily. And when she was told she'd be removed from duty, pending federal investigation and potential charges under the Passenger Rights Act, she began to sob quietly, not because she was innocent, but because she'd finally been seen for what she was, an enforcer without compassion, a gatekeeper who failed the test of simple humanity. While Colonel Keller stood, slow but firm, and as the aisle cleared for him, the passengers moved aside like parting waters, many saluting, some crying, and one man kneeling in the aisle holding his veteran grandfather's photo, whispering, "Thank you," as Keller walked out of the plane, escorted not by guards but by honor. And the flight was delayed 3 hours while new staff were called in, and the airline scrambled to respond to the growing firestorm. Online videos titled "Hero Humiliated," and "When Kindness is Forgotten" at 30,000 feet racked up millions of views, and news anchors debated Petra's actions, asking what had gone wrong in training, in policy, in culture, while others focused on Keller's history, discovering that he had once gone missing in action for 78 days during a classified rescue mission, survived frostbite and starvation, and later built homeless shelters in 5 cities with his military pension, never accepting media interviews, never seeking fame. And when finally reached by a reporter outside his modest cabin in Maine, where he lived alone with a golden retriever and a chest of unopened medals, Keller simply said, "She thought I was no one, and that's the world we've built, isn't it? Where we measure value by noise instead of silence." And when asked if he wanted Petra fired, he shook his head and replied, "No, I want her to remember that next time she speaks, the person in front of her might have once bled for the seat she's standing in." And as the story continued to spread, as protests formed outside airline HQs demanding policy reform. Keller returned to the VA hospital where he volunteered, helping amputees learn to walk again, never once mentioning the incident unless asked, and even then, only to say, "Everyone's carrying something, so don't be the weight that breaks them," while Petra, after weeks of silence, finally wrote a letter not for PR, not for defense, but to Keller himself, handwritten, mailed with trembling hands, beginning with, "Sir, I fail to see you as a human being, and for that, I ask forgiveness." And though she never received a reply, she did hear later from another passenger who'd met Keller again in a cafe near the German consulate, sitting alone with a notebook and a black coffee, still watching the world gently, still wearing that bent army cap. And when they told him Petra was now working at a hospice, volunteering to help aging veterans, he only smiled and said, "Then maybe the flight wasn't wasted after all."